Welcome to the Leading Conversations podcast, sponsored by the Excel Leadership Network. On each episode, JD Pairing will have conversations with church planting pastors and leaders from around the country. You can learn more about how to connect with Excel at the end of this podcast. Let's join JD now and listen in on this leading conversation.
Hey folks, welcome to the Excel Leading Conversations podcast. Today we are delighted to have the great and talented Scott Lackey with us, all the way from Buffalo, New York. He happens to be a Los Angeles Lakers fan, so that brings him a little bit more toward the West Coast. But Scott is a church planter, author, all-around good guy. Thanks for being here with us today, Scott.
Thank you for having me, JD. I'm really looking forward to the conversation, and it's a privilege to be here with you today.
Well, great. Well, I have some questions. I want to ask about your story, but one question that's been asked of me to bring up is, who is the better basketball player, Tim Duncan or Kobe Bryant? So we want to hear your take on this theological issue.
Well, the clear answer to this question is Kobe Bryant for a number of reasons. But one of the things that people really, I don't think, focus closely enough is the second half of Kobe's career, the two championships that he won without Shaquille O'Neal, when the second best player on his team was Pau Gasol. Now, Pau Gasol is a phenomenal player. Don't get me wrong. Great player. Lamar Odom was a good role player. Metta World Peace, solid role players. But what he was able to do, specifically in that series when he took down the Celtics, cemented him as an unbelievable player in basketball history. Tim Duncan always had a unit. He was in a system. He always had this team. And Tim Duncan, there's just nothing special about him. There are so many other people who I would rather take over Tim Duncan. He's a nice guy. He's a friendly guy. He gets the job done. But Kobe Bryant is going to throw the team on his back, and he is going to go and finish the game, and he's going to make a memory. He's going to make a beautiful poetic scene for everyone. And Kobe's just next level. He's a fighter. Tim Duncan, I mean, come on, he's Tim Duncan. Who are you? Who says to you, let's go watch Tim Duncan play? Let's go see what Tim Duncan can do. Nobody's saying that. Kobe Bryant. It's all about Kobe.
So you have the Mamba mentality.
I like to think that I have the Mamba mentality. I've read the book. I like to think that I have that kind of focus, but I feel like the Mamba mentality was we don't take days off, and every once in a while, I have to admit, I take a day off. But I like to think that there are moments of the Mamba mentality in my mindset.
Well, thank you for that opinion. Tim Duncan, took his team from worst to first when he first came there. All he did was win, and he did not have to change his number halfway through his career either.
That is true. He didn't have to reinvent himself, but Tim Duncan, he's a part of a system. Kobe Bryant said, I'm putting this thing on my back.
But if you look at the other players he was with, Manu Ginobili, Tony Parker, they wouldn't have started on that Laker team. And I'm just playing the devil's advocate. Let's get back to your story. Tell us about how did you come to Christ?
I came to Christ at a young age at a Christian youth camp. I was about 15, and I'd heard the gospel before, but that's when I had a moment where I said to myself, oh, Jesus actually really wants to know me and have a relationship with me, and also wants to potentially use my life for kingdom purposes. And so throughout high school, I began to develop this concept of what it meant to know him. And obviously I was a high school kid, so I got into some things. I was, a little bit mischievous at times and all that stuff, but I really started to embrace that around 14, 15. And then I was about 18 years old was when I received what I felt was a call to ministry. And the rest is kind of history after that. God's been leading me and all of those beautiful things. And so about 14 years old is when I made that decision to say, hey, I want to embrace Jesus as my Lord and Savior.
Well, flesh out that call to ministry for us a little bit. What was that like?
Yeah, that's always a fun story to tell. So I got to my senior year of high school, and I said to myself, what am I going to do with my life? Because I really didn't know what I was going to do. And my older brother who went before me was one of those, he's just an organized guy. And by the time he was a sophomore in high school, he knew where he was going to college. He knew what he wanted to study. And I got to be a senior, and I had great parents. They weren't comparing me to my older brother, but I still, for some reason, felt the weight of that. And I'm thinking, I don't know what I'm going to do. Am I going to go to school? What's next for me? And I was doing church online actually at the time with Craig Rochelle's church, Life Church, and they were doing a 21-day fast at the beginning of the year in January of my senior year. And so I was like, I'll just do that with my online church family. I'll do a 21-day fast and pray about, God, what are the next steps that you have for me? And it was in that time I received what I call my life verse, which is 2 Timothy 4:5, which says, as for you, always be sober-minded, endure suffering, do the work of an evangelist, fulfill your ministry. Well, now I know we're all supposed to do the work of an evangelist, but for me at that time, I felt as if God was speaking to me, go do the work of an evangelist and fulfill the ministry that I have for you. And I didn't just feel a call to ministry in that. I felt a call to church planting, because most of the pastors I was listening to, someone like a Craig Rochelle, had planted a church. He planted Life Church in 1996. And so I had this buzz to do the work of an evangelist and one day start a church. And I felt that that's what God had called me to do. And then a little bit after that, I received some confirmations of, hey, go into ministry, pursue that. And that's when I first got that call, was in January of my senior year of high school.
Now, 2 Timothy 4:5 sounds like a Tim Duncan verse to me, but church planting sounds much more like Kobe Bryant.
Most definitely. Most definitely.
So what did you do when you started to think about, maybe I should plant a church? What were the first steps? Because you were fairly young at that time, right?
I was pretty young. It was always on my mind, but I knew at that point in time, I needed to do one of two things, or both. I needed to get some ministry experience, or I needed to go to school, or both. And at the time, I was given an opportunity to work at a Christian program up here in Western New York. I was living in Virginia. I had some family here in the area. They kind of built that bridge. So I moved up here in the Buffalo area to pursue that. And after a year of being up here, I had an opportunity to go be a youth director at a church plant. And that was a really interesting experience. We were given a building. And so I had to launch the youth group before we launched the church. I was asked to do that, launch the youth group before we launched the church. And so I was, in a sense, starting a group. I did this at 19, 20 years old, and I was getting that itch already of, okay, I'm learning what it means to build up some leaders. I'm learning what it means to reach out and make connections in the community. And that was a very fulfilling experience for me in a lot of ways, but it was also a challenging one because I jumped in full speed ahead. And there were some things within that experience, within the leadership construct, that was a little bit damaging for me as a young leader, but ultimately it was a great experience. And I did that for about a year and a half. And then I came out of that and I had this year and a half of ministry experience. I was about 21 years old then. I knew I wanted to plant a church. I had started dating my now wife, Kim. I wanted to get married, and I had all these moving pieces, and I didn't know what my next step was. And I thought, well, maybe I'll go to school. And I'd been avoiding school for the longest time, but there was a local program here where I could get a bachelor's degree in biblical studies. And my future father-in-law sat me down and said, I would like for you to go to school. If you go to this program, I'll pay for half of it. And I thought, well, I guess that's what I got to do then. So I went, and I've gotten a couple of degrees since, but either way, in that connection, through that program, I then got a job at a local church here called The Chapel. And what was really cool about that was when they hired me, I told them, hey, I feel God has called me to plant a church one day. And they said, we're fine with that. We'll support you in that, but we want to equip you to become a leader in that time period. I said, great. So myself and my wife, Kim, I'm giving you a lot of history in a short period of time. We worked at the chapel for a few years. And then in fall of 2018, we started feeling God stirring in our hearts to move towards planting a church. And so we put together a 2-year plan to plant a church in 2020 because we wanted to plant a church in the year of a pandemic. So that's what we did.
Did anybody tell you were too young to do this?
Most definitely. I heard that from a number of people. I had one pastor look at me and say, just so you know, I would never step foot in your church, and neither would my wife. And I thought, oh, that's very encouraging. I had a number of people say different things like that. That one sticks out to me specifically. But I've also been, as much as I want to, sometimes those things bother me. I'm also beyond encouraged by the amount of people who said, we see something in you and Kim, and we want to support you. And honestly, JD, you were one of those people who I remember at the Excel assessment. If anyone's listening, they've been through that. You're at that moment where you're waiting to see if you got a green or a yellow or a red light, and you're a little bit nervous. And I remember walking into that room at TCAL Church and Paul Mintz Church and thinking, what are they going to do? And we went in that room, and you were so encouraging and affirming, and everyone there was. And so, yeah, we did receive some of that, but we also received so much affirmation as well, which was really, really helpful.
Why did you just push through that and say, now's the time?
That is a fantastic question. There were a few things that came together for us. So in fall of 2018, when we had been living in the home that we're living in for about a year now, at that point in time, we'd been living there for about a year, and we said, we really want to start doing ministry in this community that we live in. And so I started praying with Kim, my wife, about, hey, what could be this next step? And we felt God give us a verse, and he gave us the name New Story Church, because in Christ you can have a new story. And we were praying about that. And I remember we said, here's what we would do if we were to launch this church in 2020. And then I'm not always a big signs and wonders guy, but for this, we really needed something. And I said to Kim, let's put together this 2-year plan. And this was in August of 2018 or September of 2018. We said by the end of 2018, if we do not have another couple on board with us to plant this church, then we're going to press pause and we'll reassess. And so we were praying, God, send us another couple, because I had been following church planting for a long period of time. The last thing I wanted to be was that church planter who was trying to do everything, who felt like the world was caving in on him. I didn't want to be that guy. And at that time, I was going to the gym with a friend of mine by the name of Neil Friedman. And he said this to me. He said, Scott, I've always felt called to ministry, not knowing what God was doing in my heart to plant a church. He said, Scott, I've always felt called to ministry, but I don't want to preach. And I thought, I want to preach and I feel called to ministry. And so I went home to Kim. I said, Kim, what do you think of Neil and Lindsay, the Friedmans? I really like them. We knew them from another ministry we had been involved with. Kim's like, I like the Friedmans. And so I called them and I said, hey guys, we're planting this church. Here's what it's kind of look like. We want you to do this with us. And we feel like God has brought you into our lives. And I said, take a month and think about it. Within a week, they said, we're on board. We're ready to go. And they've been with us, super committed ever since. And we looked at them coming on board as this is the confirmation. We have another couple in this with us. Very soon after that, we got another couple on board. And then you started that process of building your team up. And I just really felt the people that were surrounding us was an affirmation that God was saying, this is something that I'm involved with. And the rest is history after that. He just continued to affirm over and over again. But that for us was bring us that couple so that we're not doing this alone.
That's a cool story. Now you decide to plant and then you end up planting and getting ready to go. And then COVID hits. Talk about that experience.
Yeah, that was an interesting experience because when we had our first interest party in March of 2020. Then a week later, COVID hit. And we had that interest party. 87 people showed up. We thought, oh my goodness. It was really funny. We had a local pastor friend of mine. He showed up. He was the first one there with his wife. And he just retired this past Sunday. He just retired. But he showed up and he's like, hey, I planted a church like 35 years ago. And I had one of these meetings and nobody showed up except for my family. So I wanted to be here to support you guys. So that was just a really cool story, kind of a tangent, but it's just cool to see that God's going to bring leaders and people into your life when you're doing this. And he's been a consistent support, but COVID hit a week later and we got to this point and we said, okay, there's two options there's a few options. We could pause this, but really the two options we saw was we could focus on what we can't do, or we can focus on what we can do. And so every time something came up, it was, all right, we can't do what we normally thought we would do, but what can we do? So we did interest parties online in April, May, and June. And then July was supposed to be a team building time. That's what most church plants do. This summer, you kind of build up that launch team. And then in the fall, boom, you launch the church. Or we could have delayed to January and maybe launched in January. But who wants to launch a church in Buffalo in January when you could have a snowstorm on opening Sunday? Like, that's a bad idea. So we said we're going to keep moving forward. And it was actually Neil who had the idea. He spoke up and said, well, instead of doing outreach in the summer, because we couldn't plan for that either. We couldn't get people together. So how could we plan to build up a core team and do outreach projects till we launch in the fall? He said, why don't we just start doing online church in the middle of July, which most people would tell you is a bad idea because people are on vacation in the summertime. Don't launch a church in the middle of summer. But we were in a unique season where everyone was on the internet. And we said, let's do it. Let's launch a church. And opening Sunday, we had over 300 views. And in our first month, we had over 3,000 people view our content on YouTube. And so God blessed it. He used it. A couple people gave their lives to Christ. And so we got to experiment with launching a church online only. And then a few months later in September, we started with in-person services as well, because every place, what can we do? What can we do? What can we do? And for us to meet in person, God really opened up a cool door for that as well. We are currently meeting in an old school building that a private owner owns. So he kind of makes the rules as to if we can or can't meet. He's always been very, very gracious towards us and letting us meet, which I know a lot of my friends who are looking to plant, they were looking at movie theaters or public schools. Well, those places weren't open last year. So God just kept opening up doors. And I really think that this whole COVID thing showed us the advantage we can have to evangelize and reach people through an online platform. And we launched a church online, and it was a really cool experience. And it was an opportunity to build our team and reach more people.
Well, thanks for doing that. That was exciting for all of us to watch you launch and to say, hey, we're going to go for it. Now, during COVID, you had a little bit of free time on your hands, so you did something else that most of us should have done, but we just couldn't. Somehow you pulled it off. What did you do during COVID?
I wrote a book during COVID. I hope that's what you're referencing and not all the bad food that I ate.
Yeah. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I was coming out of one season of ministry and coming into a new season, and I had some thoughts that I was processing and thinking through. And I was reading through the life of Jacob in the book of Genesis, and I saw God making a significant transition in Jacob's life. And I thought that it was a transition that needs to be made in all of our lives as well, or we need to be reminded of in our walk with Christ. And it's this concept of we all have things in our life that we are concerned about. And concern is that interesting thing. Concern exists between anxiety and purpose. The things that you're concerned about can very quickly become the things that make you very anxious, or they can become the burdens that drive you into the purpose that God has for you. And so I put together this book, Journey into a Greater Concern. And it's about stepping out of self-concern, which leads to anxiety, and stepping into God's greater concern, which leads to the purpose that God has for you. And so I wrestled with a few different concepts and ideas in the book, and we journey along with Jacob. And we see in the book, how do you allow God to break your will so that you can experience his will, which is ultimately a greater concern wherever it is that he has placed you.
I'm looking at your book right now on Amazon. You gave it to me a while back. I finally broke down and got it on Kindle because I don't read paper books anymore. In my advanced age, it's harder to see, and I just like the Kindle approach. But give us one little snippet from the book that's made a difference in your life.
Oof, that's a good one. So in regards to speaking to me personally, would be chapter 6, I believe, which is about the aim of your life and what are you aiming at, and constantly reminding myself that the things, I look at Philippians chapter 3 in that passage to look forward to what lies ahead. the things that we constantly find ourselves frustrated at, we can continually make those things into the villain and then miss out on who the true villain is, which is the enemy who came to steal, kill, and destroy. But when we aim the direction of our life high and we aim it towards the purposes of Christ, we can know that we're fighting the fight that we've been called to fight. And that was a great reminder in the midst of COVID. I share a story in there from someone who is a part of New Story. Her name's Kaylin. She's a brand manager. And instead of looking at this situation, her story so inspired me. Instead of looking at COVID and saying, I'm just a brand manager, I can't do anything, she looked at it and said, how can I use my role to help local coffee shops, which seems like a small thing, but it became a huge thing. And she raised, if you gave money to a coffee shop, a certain amount of money through her campaign, they would then provide coffee for essential workers. And she ended up raising over $40,000 for local coffee shops here in Buffalo to continue to fund them and keep their business going. It was called Fuel the Front Lines, but it also provided coffee for frontline workers. And it was just a reminder to me that when we are faced with these frustrations, the government is not the enemy, even though it's so easy to get upset. The person who disagrees with you politically is not the enemy, although it's so easy to get upset at them. Or the restrictions are not the enemy. The enemy is the one who came to steal, kill, and destroy. And so aim high, aim above the circumstance and say, what can I do? What has Christ called me to do? And that's what her story inspired me to do. And that's what the life of Jacob inspired me to do. Once he wrestles with God, he learns what it means to aim high and to make a difference and say, hey, instead of just being worried about me, how can I be concerned about those around me and see above whatever it is that's happening, maybe immediately to me, and see that there's an eternal purpose at work within this.
Chapter 6, Journey into a Greater Concern by Scott Lackey. You can get it on Amazon. Kindle's on sale today for $6.99. I don't know if you know that or not, and who knows where they come up with the Kindle prices, but thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
I have a few more questions. One is, you're in Buffalo. Those of us who are not need to know, tell us 2 or 3 positive things about Buffalo.
It's going to be hard for me to keep it to 2 or 3, but I'll keep it to 2 or 3. First of all, our food here is unbelievable. People don't want to listen to me about that all the time, but it's very, very true. Just look it up. We have the best pizza. We have unbelievable wings. We have great breakfast places. I could take you to a place right around the house from me that's diners, drive-ins, and dives has been there. We're great at it. We have great food here in Buffalo. We have a great sports culture here in Buffalo. Bills Mafia all the way. Love Bills Mafia. And then lastly, I know some people hate on the weather, but I love the weather here. I think it's great. We do get all 4 seasons. I know some people don't think we do, but we do get all 4 seasons. And it's really a great city, great family bond here in this city. And I love the unity. There's a strong unity in this city. If you stay here and you're a part of this city and this community, you get buy-in from other people, because it's like, yeah, we're the people who stay in the place that everyone just looks at the bad weather place. We're the people who stay in the place that everyone thinks, oh, you guys lost 4 straight Super Bowls. We're those crazy people. We're those crazy people who drive in the snow. And there's a bond here that if I go anywhere in the country and I see someone wearing a Bills hat or a Bills sweater or a Bills shirt, we're going to strike up a conversation. There's this underlying bond in this community, and it's a really cool thing. And I love being a part of it.
Well, thanks for the endorsement. That's the Chamber of Commerce commercial right there. Last thing I want to ask you is, you're a young guy. When you were at the Discovery Center, I remember praying for you and Kim and just thinking, just this vision from God, these people are going to be alive a lot longer than you. And just the opportunity you have to be in church planting for the next probably 50 years. Let me ask you this. Everybody says, where do you see yourself 5 years from now? Where do you want to be 45 years from now?
45 years from now?
45 years, yeah. Like pushing 70 or whatever. What's your long-term, I know you're a strategic guy. Where do you want to be then?
To be quite honest, when I talked to Kim about this, we want to be doing very similar things to what you and Lori are doing. We want to be pouring into church planters, to the next generation, and we want to be we want to be at a spot where we're still learning from them, but we also want to be investing and giving back to church planters. And that's really our goal. We want to, as a couple, to do that. It's simple. It's not necessarily anything that we don't need to have, a bunch of property or anything like that. I mean, that'd be cool if we accumulated a lot of stuff over the years, but ultimately at the end of the day, what we want to do is we want to be at a spot where we can take the experiences that God has given us and we can pour back in to those who are upcoming in the church planting world. And we want to be a part of planting churches. That's really what we would love to do.
Well, great. I hope you can hang in there for that. I hope you can hang into Buffalo as long as you can. And God's got great plans for you. Don't let anybody look down on your youth. I think that's what Paul said to Timothy and what other people said to Kobe Bryant and Tim Duncan. Well, so thank you so much for being on with us. Thanks for what you're doing there. Keep it up. We're looking forward to what God's going to do in you and Kim and your family and New Story and even in Buffalo. So thanks so much.
Love it. Thank you so much, JD. I appreciate it.
Thanks for joining the Leading Conversations podcast. We hope that you found it both helpful and encouraging. At Excel Leadership Network, our focus is on the church planter rather than the church. If you'd like to find out more about us, visit our webpage at excelnetwork.org. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss any future episodes. See you next time with another Leading Conversation.